the Miracle Boy, the main attraction in an extreme sport tried by very few, executed by even less.
From the first time I saw Dave, I knew he was advanced. He just had a little more drive than we did, than pretty much anybody did.
He always wanted to be a rider. He didn't care if it was not accepted. He didn't care if it was an outlaw sport at the time.
Dave Mirra beat the best rider in the business right out of high school.
I was the first one to beat Matt Hoffman in 3.5 years. He was still the best ramp rider in the world, and I beat him. That's crazy.
His aerial assault would take a tragic turn.
He got flung into the air probably 15 or 20 feet and flipped through the air like a rag doll. He landed on the curb, and I'm gonna take a second.
He thought for sure that I was dead. He said it was pretty gnarly.
He obviously hit his head because his head wasn't in the shape of a normal head anymore.
He would survive a drunk driver, only to struggle with self-doubt.
I didn't ride that much. I wasn't interested, really. I think I came to a point where I was like, I haven't ridden in so long, I don't know if I really want to ride anymore.
He would risk everything and revolutionize his sport.
Oh, David has no fear. He's just never had any fear. He doesn't know the word.
Oh my gosh.
Dave Mirra rose to the top of his sport, propelled by his own 2 feet. BMX, or bicycle motocross, is judged by 2 disciplines. The vert ramp, measured by height and grace, and the street course, an artistic expression painted over a canvas of daredevil obstacles. Riders compete in 90-second runs in each category.
A lot of times I try to get too calculated or too structured in a run, and man, I'm too worried about, well, if I do this, I might crash. And if you see me in a contest, if I'm in a zone, it's totally different. There's no like, well, should I do this? And I don't have time to think. It's like, it's just get on with it and do it. There's no option.
Give it up to Dave Mirra.
It all started for Dave Mirra in upstate New York.
Well, I grew up in Chittenango, New York, which is about 20 miles east of Syracuse. There's probably 15,000 in the town.
I think the town was maybe 3 miles long if you were lucky.
Michael and Linda Mirra divorced when their boys were still young, but both stayed involved in their lives.
He was a very energetic person. He'd be out of the house at 6:30 in the morning and play all day long when he was just a young guy,
We saw our mom every weekend. She was in the city in Syracuse.
Him and his brother Tim were always on their bikes. They just loved riding their bikes.
My brother was 2 years older. Obviously, it was tougher for me to keep up with him because he was stronger, he was older, he was smarter. And I was determined to beat him at whatever we tried to do.
We were real close and we got along really good, and all I can remember is him and I sitting out in the garage for till 1 o'clock in the morning, just cleaning our bikes, spoke by spoke. And my dad would come out there, he's in his bathrobe. What are you guys doing out here? It's a school night. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. We're out there cleaning our bikes.
I don't remember the exact age I learned how to ride a bike, but I remember being out there by myself, getting on the curb, because I couldn't reach the pedals without the curb. I'd get on it, pedal, fall over. And I'd get back up and walk over to the curb and try it again and again and again. One day I took off and just kept riding.
I've always said that Dave got on the bike and never got off.
He was no sooner riding and then he did learn wheelies. So I should have known something was in the cards then.
But for the young Mirra boys, the bicycle season was short.
In Syracuse, they have probably some of the worst winters in the country.
It might only be 26 degrees outside. We'd shovel the driveway off, let it dry, and we'd go out there with gloves, hats, everything. Or we'd ride in our basement.
We had a basement that was carpeted and, you know, paneled and all that. And they literally destroyed the place. Really. You know, and they spent their winters riding in the cellar.
We'd be ripping up the rug, putting holes in the paneling, riding every single day after school. No, we haven't ridden down there at all. You know, just, he knew it. He knew we rode down there, but he just let us do what we were going to do. And so we were always finding a way to ride, whether it was 30 degrees or 105. We'd take a cement cinder block, a fence gate, a piece of plywood, and that'd be our jump out front for the night.
When they saw us start jumping, 9 trash cans, I mean, they said, we might want to just keep an eye on them.
They began racing BMX, but that stopped as quickly as it started.
But the track was like 45 minutes away. You know, my dad worked 3 jobs. My mom worked, full time. So to get to the track was near impossible. So we got more interested in freestyle, flatland tricks, jumping ramps, posing on your bike, balancing, hopping.
They would be out in the front of the house, and they was going, oh, we're doing this trick, and watch this, we're doing that trick. And it was terrific, but I had no idea it was going to lead into this.
In 1984, the boys went to see the Haro bike team perform a freestyle show.
That show back then was just a lot of balancing tricks. It took a hand, a foot off, and that was really about it. For the first time seeing that stuff, it really made a big impact.
The event would change their lives.
They were just mesmerized by it. They loved it. They loved it.
I was introduced to my all-time favorite, Dennis McCoy.
I heard a lot about Dennis McCoy when he was growing up.
I was the top pro, rider at the time, and Dave was a 12-year-old kid. He was a pretty little guy. In fact, for years I called him Little Buddy.
I think Dennis kind of took him under his wing.
I was in awe.
Inspired by Dennis and the Haro team, Dave began to experiment.
From the first time I saw Dave, I knew he was advanced. But he just had a little more drive than we did, than pretty much anybody did.
David's always been very determined. I mean, when he sets his mind on something to do it, he puts 100% into it, and he's always been that way with anything he's done.
If I could ride 2 hours straight, he could ride 4 hours straight.
I started standing out from the riders in the area, and I remember the first pro that actually really recognized me was Fred Blood.
Fred Blood was a BMX innovator and one of the first athletes to get sponsored to ride a bike.
I did this reverse walk around that I saw him do in a video.
He could barely get his leg around the bike. He had to hop in the middle of the trick to make it around the whole frame. Fred Blood, his jaw hit the floor. He couldn't believe what he just saw.
He went into the bike shop and talked to the owners and said, do you guys realize how good this guy is? So they put me on their freestyle team. I met a whole new group of riders.
It wasn't long until top bike manufacturer Haro wanted Dave as well.
And they said, you're going to be part of the Haro team. It blew my mind. I mean, all my friends couldn't believe it. My dad didn't even believe it, All of a sudden, one day, the bike shows up in the mail, and I think everybody was like, geez, it's crazy.
That was where you started to see that there is something beyond riding for the fun of it or the love of it.
We started seeing him popping up on the videos and everything. It wasn't really a surprise to us, but we were really stoked.
People started hearing about me when other teams would come and put on shows, and they were seeing me ride and do things that they weren't doing.
He entered his first contest at age 13. It was a disaster.
I got 11th place out of 12 riders. I was bummed, but I wasn't discouraged. I went home and worked harder.
I said, you just have to keep at it, and keep at it, and depending on how bad you want to do it, and you'll make it work.
1988, I went to my next contest. I got first in flatland, first in ramps. So in that 6-7 months, I learned so much. That really catapulted me by a lot of the guys in my age division.
Just amazing what he was pulling. If he's interested in it, he can do it.
If it comes easy, it's not as fun. But if it's hard and it's scary and it takes you a while, you see a finished product, and then you're that much more motivated to dial that in so there's no fear anymore in your head. You move on to the next trick, which was once impossible as well.
And you almost have to be careful with Dave because, you know, you talk about things and he finally gets the nerve up to try one of these tricks. Chances are he's got it a little more dialed than the rest of us. So you don't want to be selfish with your things, but at times you're like, I don't know if I want to show Dave this one just yet because if he picks it up, it's going to be dialed.
In 1992, at the age of 18, Dave turned pro by signing with the most respected rider in the sport.
That was asked by Matt Hoffman to ride for his company, Hoffman Bikes.
Matt went on a string of like three and a half years of not being beaten. And Matt was he was the measuring stick when it came to the vert ramp. He was the guy that was going higher than anybody and doing the biggest tricks, and we idolized Matt back then. I remember some of the sessions there were amazing at Matt's private warehouse. Dave was just blasting huge airs, tail lips, 540s. And I could overhear Matt talking about Dave. I could just hear him and his admiration. He was going, this kid's good. He's going to be awesome. I don't know. I got to maybe see about getting this guy on the team or something.
I went to my first contest in Dallas, Texas, 1992, and Matt flew me out. I rode my first professional vert contest and got second place behind Matt. Second place in 1992 is first place because nobody beat Matt Hoffman.
Later that year, there would be a seismic shift in BMX.
Next up is 18-year-old Dave Mirra.
I was the first one to beat Matt Hoffman in 3.5 years. And that was just pretty surreal.
That was astounding. It's like, well, Dave, you definitely got what it takes.
It's like that hurdle you don't have to cross again. It gives you that inner confidence.
For somebody to beat Matt, you know, at a contest like that, all of a sudden it became anybody's game.
It wasn't just you got to have to beat Hoffman. Now you got to beat Mirra too. He got flung into the air probably 15 or 20 feet and then flipped through the air like a rag doll.
He obviously had hit his head because his head wasn't in the shape of a normal head anymore.
I'm gonna take a second. Seriously.
At the age of 18, Dave Mirra beat the best ramp rider in the sport, Matt Hoffman.
I was young, healthy, still into riding bikes every single day. So everything at that point was just on the way up.
By the end of that year, 1993, no one knew if Dave would ever ride a bike again.
It was December in New York, so you can pretty much expect rain and cold. I was leaving a club with two of my friends, and I don't remember anything after that. I remember waking up in the hospital and seeing my family around me, and this was probably a day later.
Dave's friend, Jim Cook, was with him the night of the accident.
We went out to this dance club, and we all had a really good time. And the club closed at 2 o'clock in the morning. There was a lot of people that were working their way across the street, and it wasn't a very busy street, really. All of a sudden, everybody started moving really quick. So I looked up, and right when I looked over to my right, there were headlights that were right on top of us.
All of a sudden, they heard a car skidding or coming, they heard a car.
I jumped across the street, and I could see Dave was just trying to make a move out of the way, but he was facing directly at the car. He flipped up, and his head and shoulder hit the top of the window, where the window meets the roof, and he got flung into the air probably 15 or 20 feet and flipped through the air like a rag doll. And he landed on the curb. I'm gonna take a second. Seriously.
He thought for sure that I was dead. He said it was pretty gnarly.
5501 deploy King, Frank 2.
He landed half on the curb and half in the street. His head was laying in a mud puddle, and he was knocked out, and his breathing was very unsteady. And I rushed right over to him, tried talking to him, waking him up, but he wasn't moving. And I saw blood spilling into the mud puddle, and that's when I knew it was serious.
All of a sudden, I woke up and was freaking out, like, Jim, get me out of here, get me out of here. Just was totally out of it, don't remember any of it.
He was just freaking out and was fighting. And I remember I got right in his face, and I was like, Dave, take it easy, it's Jim. He's like, oh, and then finally he focused on my eyes, and he was like, he seemed to get calm. And I said, dude, you're messed up, take it easy. You just sit there and wait.
Like any parent, nobody wants a phone call at 2 in the morning.
He walked into my room probably about, I'd probably say 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. And actually, this is kind of weird because the first question I asked him was, what happened to Dave? He said he was in an accident. And I said, well, was he wearing a seatbelt? Because I figured it was a car accident, you know? And he said, well, I'm not sure what it is yet. I'm going to go to the hospital and find out. And he said, I'll call you if it's bad.
He was hit by an underage drunk driver at 45 miles per hour.
Well, I was on call for the neurosurgery department, covering both the University Hospital and Cross Hospital for neurosurgery that evening. David was found to have a fracture of his skull on the right side. It was a type that you don't usually have to deal with surgically. On the CAT scan, we noted that he had a bruising of his brain. One could see blood mixed with the brain tissue. And in addition, he had developed a small clot, blood clot, over the brain and over the dura. That's a covering of the brain. So it was an epidural clot.
I went down to the hospital, and he was there, and he was kind of a mess. His shoulder was dislocated. He was in and out of consciousness, and he got whacked on the head pretty good.
And sure enough, he called me, and he told me, he goes, you better come down to the hospital because it doesn't look too good.
When I walked in and saw him in ICU, I lost it.
They didn't have a lot to say at first, but they were waiting to see if there was going to be any internal injuries. They never can tell right away.
These are the first series of CAT scans that were obtained on David. This is on the night of his accident. This is on the plain X-ray here. You can see very clearly the fracture line there. One can see this is a brain tissue here. This is a skull bone. This is a hematoma or clot. It's called an epidural because it's on the dura, the covering of the brain.
When I walked in, my father was standing there and Dave was laying on a table. He, you can tell by the way he obviously had hit his head because his head wasn't in the shape of a normal head anymore.
Visually, the one thing one could see was the swelling of his scalp. Much more disconcerting was the evidence of the blood over the brain, the epidural clot, and then the evidence of bruising, blood mixed with his brain tissue in his brain itself. And very often, if it increases and if it starts causing increasing pressure on the brain, it can be fatal.
They were waiting to see if they were going to have to rush him to emergency surgery. And the waiting was the hardest part. It's even now hard to even think about it.
He just told us you have to be very, very careful right now because if it puts too much pressure on there, they're going to have to go ahead and open his head up.
It wasn't like a knee injury or a shoulder injury where I knew I was going to get well. A lot of times, a blood clot on your brain never dissolves. And that's what the doctor was scared about. He said, this might not ever go away.
but he's always working on some kind of new crazy trick. The street courses keep evolving, the park courses that we compete on. You can sit down on paper and say, what if we designed a ramp like this? And then progression comes as a result of that. Dave progressed competitive riding in his own way by being able to go out and just nail like a 90-second run where he's going huge, then going back to lip tricks, then going huge again. That's hard to touch today. When you do pull it and you nail it, you have a certain satisfaction that you push your own personal limits and the sports.
Dave Mirra became the premier BMX performer of his generation. He pushed his body and mind beyond what was considered reasonable or even possible. The Miracle Boy was pushed to the very edge of his life at the age of 18.
An underage girl was drunk and didn't see me in the road and just hit me going like 45.
He had you know, damage to his shoulder, and he had had an awful skull fracture. And the thing that they were worried about was swelling on his brain. And if that didn't go down within the next few hours, they were going to have to rush him to surgery.
He was not changing dramatically, neurologically. Luckily for him, over the next several days, instead of worsening, he progressively got better.
He was released after 8 days. Dr. Shende was cautious about his recovery.
Initially, we had started him on a therapy to minimize the chances of having a seizure. Because after a head injury, especially if there's any damage to the brain tissue itself, one can sometimes get a seizure problem.
I was the one that took him home from the hospital when he finally was released. He had his arm in a sling, and he couldn't really pronounce words right, and he was slurring.
Dave and I were living in an apartment, so he came directly home to that apartment with us from the hospital. It was a slow recovery, and riding wasn't even in the picture at that point.
My smell and taste were definitely off for a while, and I wake up in the morning with just severe headaches.
Memory-wise, he had trouble. He had a period where he may be thinking one thing and he would say something totally different. With a brain injury, you just have to wait and see.
He's kind of slipped into a mode of doubting himself and also getting out of shape.
I accepted what happened, but I wasn't sure that I was ever going to ride again. I wasn't sure I ever wanted to ride again. I'd go out and watch my buddies ride and obviously wish that I could ride, but I didn't have a desire at that point. I knew I was injured, so I wasn't even wishing I could get on a bike.
He didn't know if he wanted to stay on his bike or not, or what he wanted to do. He needed to get some confidence back.
6 months after the accident, Dave underwent another CAT scan to determine his progress.
This shows very nicely how things have gotten back to normal. On this view, here we could see the epidural clot that I'd shown. That's all gone. There's no clot there too. And now you can see the ventricles both symmetrical. So this is a normal CAT scan, and this was 6 months later.
The doctor looked at me and said, you know, you're fine.
But he also advised him to find another career because another head injury at that point could be the worst thing that could happen to him.
If you were playing a college organized sport, your career would be over with. I wouldn't let you go back and play.
Clinically, his recovery was complete, but if he had had repeated injuries, you can become dysfunctional, not only physically, but also cognitively, and become less capable of making appropriate decisions.
I would advise you, never ride again. If you hit your head, you can have complications. I said, okay, I appreciate that.
The doctor had said that he probably shouldn't ride again, but that was like saying to David, you know, you might as well just forget it. He was going to ride again.
he wanted to ride his bike, but I think there was a lot of doubt in his mind whether or not he was ever going to be at the level he was at before that accident.
One major sponsor still believed in Dave's talent. GT Bikes had been in negotiations with Dave before the accident. Now the company wanted to sign him with one stipulation.
GT kind of had a policy where they wanted you living out in Southern California. Dave was going to ride for GT, and it was going to become, in some ways, sort of like a job.
I was really nervous about that, and I said, well, just be careful, don't take any chances. If something doesn't feel right, you know, don't do it.
I went out to California, and it didn't click. Got on my bike, and I did a flip fakie first try, tail whip. I mean, I could do tricks. I was a little scared at first, but things came back pretty easy. But I didn't want to go on tour. I didn't want to live in California.
So he came back home again.
That pretty much ended the deal for GT Bikes.
The scene was dead in Syracuse at that time. There's no ramps to ride, and I think Dave and I were about the only two BMX riders in central New York at that time.
All of a sudden, his support group, everybody's kind of gone on their different ways with different aspects of their life.
While Dave had been in California, his older brother Tim had left home as well, relocating to Greenville, North Carolina.
We spoke on the phone here and there, and he just basically said there's no one to ride with up there and the weather's terrible.
So David was doing absolutely nothing, and he knew that he had to do something.
I built a 24-foot wide vert ramp in my dad's yard, and I built it thinking, well, if I build this ramp, I'll get back into it.
There was not a lot of people riding vert at the time, and it's not safe to ride vert by yourself, because if you do crash, who knows how long you could lay out there before somebody found you.
I ended up making a shed out of it is what I did.
I knew I needed to make changes. I was thinking at times, maybe I've done what I've done, and maybe I need to move on. And I remember that end of '94, I got a full-time job at a car dealership, washing cars.
You know, David, like David said, I've never really worked a real job because you know, his job was riding.
I think he lasted maybe 2 days. I think that was about it. He said he couldn't do it.
I was at a confused point in my life that I didn't know what direction I was going. I still love bike riding, but I didn't ride for almost a year, so I was like, you know what, do I really want to get back on my bike again?
You don't want to just see one of your main rivals and one of the guys that pushes you to personally progress to just disappear from the scene.
I needed a change, and Syracuse wasn't doing it for me anymore. Everything that made me happy there was gone.
He would just fire out trick after trick after trick, and he didn't need to slow down.
I think I came to a point where I was like, you know, I haven't ridden in so long, I don't know if I really want to ride anymore. It wasn't like a knee injury or a shoulder injury where I knew I was going to get well. A lot of times a blood clot on your brain never goes away, never dissolves. And that's what the doctor was scared about. He said to me, you know, this might not ever go away.
By 1993, Dave Mirra was a rising star in the extreme sports revolution, but a drunk driver almost cut short his promise and his life.
I was bummed because I was confused. One thing that really picked me up was Dennis really pushing me to get back into it and go ride for Haro.
1 year after surviving a fractured skull, Dave returned to his sport with help from Dennis McCoy, the rider he idolized when he was 10 years old.
Haro, which was my original sponsor, and then the sponsor that sponsored Dave, called me up out of the blue, and they were interested in having me ride for Haro again. I was like, you know, you should call. You guys should talk to Dave, man. This guy, you got to see him ride.
The Haro bike team had made an enormous impression on Dave and his brother Tim when they were just kids.
I was kind of half into it, half I was like, yeah, D, it'd be cool, you know, but it's probably a long shot. I haven't even ridden all year.
But realize this is small change compared to the, kind of money that's in the industry now. It's not like we're talking huge dollars here.
They were offering me, Haro said $500 a month. I said, nah, that's not even enough, man, to get me back into it.
So I just decided to edit this Dave Mirra video clip and send it to my friend at Haro just to say, hey, quit lowballing the guy. Maybe you don't know just how good he is. He was like, Dennis, I got that tape in, and I think we need to reconsider our offer.
They get the video, they go 900. I go, do 1,000 and I'll do it. And that was my first paying sponsor ever.
To think that he was so fond of David and concerned about him at that point to jump in and do something like that, I think that's just wonderful.
You don't want to just see one of your main rivals and one of the guys that pushes you to personally progress to just disappear from the scene.
I know that was a big boost for Dave because that kind of showed him maybe I can still pull this off.
But the 20-year-old wasn't the same young kid who had beaten the best ramp riders in the world.
He'd put on some weight.
He was out of shape physically, and more importantly, he was mentally out of shape.
For a short time there, his confidence was kind of shattered. That's what I think's funny about Dave is his mindset can just change on a dime. We're at that event, and he's having some problems with some of the ramps. And he's like, man, Dennis, man, I don't know. I don't even feel like I belong here right now, man. I'm riding like crap, and I'm not feeling that ramp or this or that. And then 5 minutes later, he pulls this really crazy trick. The place goes nuts. That's all it took to boost his confidence up to the point to where he rolls up to me and he's like, yo, D, man, Dennis, I think the rest of y'all might want to start thinking about second.
Dave was back on his bike and getting paid to ride. But Syracuse wasn't the same without his brother. Tim had moved to Greenville, North Carolina.
He realized there was a skate park. He could see it right from his apartment.
I looked out my window and I saw a blue, I thought it was a swimming pool over there. Well, I got up and I walked over to the park, and sure enough, it was a mini ramp. And I've been off my bike, for probably 6-8 months. I haven't been riding much. So once I saw that, I got on the phone with my brother, on the phone with Dave, and said, Dave, you got to come down and check this out.
One morning I woke up and said, man, I'm gonna get down and visit him. Went down and rode the park, had a good time, had a little small local scene that was cool, and they were riding every single day.
There was no scene in Syracuse going on, and I remember when Dave came back from that trip, he was really excited on bike riding again, and there was a couple guys around here who could ride, and the weather was great, and I think it just got him a little bit fired up again.
I needed a change, and Syracuse wasn't doing it for me anymore. Everything that made me happy there was gone. I packed up a little rider truck and headed down to Greenville. Didn't look back, man. The main reason was my brother, just to get closer with him again and realize I needed to change.
For their whole life, they'd always been together. And then when Tim moved down there, I know they missed each other.
When they went to Greenville, I always felt that they had each other. They always had someone they could rely on, family-wise.
He set the apartment up for me, got it all lined up. When I pulled in with a truck, it was on.
We started riding like crazy. We were riding every day. We started building ramps. We started talking to the city. We started talking to people that have already talked to the city. And we just tried to build our own little scene down here. And that's exactly what happened.
I think I gained, being in Syracuse and not riding. I was like maybe 178 pounds. I lost everything in a couple of months. I was back down to, where I am right now, 150.
He just jumped back into it like he never stopped. He got out there and he started hitting everything. He started coming up with new ramp ideas. He said, we got to build a ramp like this. We got to try this, and start learning all these other tricks.
It was just all the troubles that I had in Syracuse were gone.
With his brother by his side, Dave began to change the sport.
When you put a run together, usually back in the day, you'd be known for more like 1 or 2 big tricks in a run. He'd say, look, I want to try something different here. He'd go out there and he'd link a bunch of tricks together, and not slowly. I mean, at high speed, and link them all together with different ramps and just keep flowing around the whole course using everything.
If I was a viewer watching this, how would I want to see it? Are these true athletes or are they just daredevils? For me, I had a change planned in my head that, you know what, take your contest serious and put together something that's going to look good on TV that I would want to see.
Dave led the way as far as how to win a contest. You're not just going to go out there and do a couple of tricks, plop out on the deck and take some breathers, and then, you know, roll into your last big trick. Dave spent so much time on his bike and he was in such condition that he didn't need to take a break.
And I would lay in bed, you know, sweating, thinking about a run, thinking about tricks, and how I wanted to almost prepare myself for the contest, how I wanted to operate or act at the event.
He was the first guy to tell me, like at the very first X Games, man, you just stay on your bike. They're looking for you to stay on your bike.
Dave raised the stakes. He made it tougher to stay on the bike.
We were used to riding narrow ramps. They got wider, and it was like, man, let's use this ramp.
He went side to side and back and forth, and he never stopped.
He would start to do everything in different directions. He was the first guy, really, to go opposite airs. Kind of like on a skateboard. You just go back and forth and continue to flow in both directions effortlessly.
I just watched skateboard runs, and I said, man, that's what I want to do on a bike.
He had so many tricks and so much stamina that he would just fire out trick after trick after trick, and he didn't need to slow down. He slowed down when the buzzer rang. Everybody else needed to take that break.
In 1995, BMX and other extreme sports were given legitimacy. They were put on national television.
With television came a new era where we weren't just taking these glory runs where we were hucking ourselves and crashing and getting rewarded for it. Suddenly it was like if you didn't ride clean, you weren't going to see the score to reflect the first place ride.
You look at the contest now, it's a must. If you crash, you're almost guaranteed not going to win the contest.
The man who rewrote the rules would become the sport's greatest star.
He went on this like unbelievable streak for the next few years to where he was hard to beat in vert or street.
David was in the right place at the right time when everything just kind of exploded onto the scene.
That happened like almost virtually overnight. Like, wow, this stuff's taking off like crazy. I mean, where's it gonna go from here?
You could see it getting bigger and bigger. More fans, bigger prize money, more stakes.
It always comes back to me. It always comes back to me. It always comes back to me. It always comes back to me.
Because of his talent and his story, he was given the nickname Miracle Boy.
It's like if anybody can pull something off, David has. So I guess that's why he's earned the nickname, and to me it's kind of fitting. And now that he's a little bit older, it's gone from Miracle Boy to maybe Miracle Man. That trick has got to be so precise, and anything off, and you can come right down on your head.
You know, get on with your life, and you're not the only one taking chances.
Dave Mirra won gold in the first 5 X Games street competitions. He became a trailblazer in the new frontier of extreme sports after being advised by his doctor to give up trick riding altogether.
There was a time along the way where I was at a really low point, and it was easy to stay in that low point because I didn't have the bike every day anymore. And to get back on it made me realize this is what really makes me happy. You know, get on with your life, and you're not the only one taking chances. Look at everybody else out here that are taking chances to be what they want to be and the risks they take to be successful.
In May of 2000, In Raleigh, North Carolina, Dave executed the first double backflip in competition.
That trick, the timing is it's got to be so precise, and anything off, and you can come right down on your head. I'm so afraid of another head injury.
You know, people have gone through things in their life that have worked against them, whether it's a drug addiction, whether it's a bad background, whether it's people saying, there's no way you can make it. Just don't get caught up in that stuff, man. And to see people break those trends, habits, vices that are holding them back, to me, that's awesome.
Dave signed with his first sponsor at the age of 13. He got a free bike and a discount on repair work. Now, his corporate sponsorships have made him a millionaire many times over. The Miracle Boy is one of the most famous athletes in extreme sports today.
It was amazing because we always looked up to the top guys, and we never dreamed that one of us would make it. Dave didn't only make it, he surpassed everybody else.
Cool. Natural creation.
I was in last place. I sat there almost ready to give up. Like, Dave, I know I didn't even want to go in and ride. I really was like, oh man, I got to go in for another minute.
By 2004, Dave Mirra had reached the pinnacle of his profession. He needed just one medal at the X Games to be the most decorated athlete in the 10-year history of the event.
I was probably the least nervous of any X Games yet. I didn't say, shoot for gold, make it work. It was more like, just go out and show the people that you still can ride.
In his first event, the vert ramp, he showed the world a brand new trick. The flare tail whip, and took the gold.
I don't think there's anybody around that hasn't heard about the BMX, and as a result doesn't know Dave by name, because he's won more medals than anybody.
The elation over his record-setting run would disappear on the street course, where he crashed to start the competition.
I wasn't feeling the course. I was like, man, do I have to go out there and ride for 2 minutes? Come on. I had a whole run plan in my head that I said, man, if I can do it, that's going to be awesome. I don't know if it's going to win, but I'm going to be psyched on it. I was in last place, all or nothing, and I went right to the top. I rolled in and just looked the situation in the eye and dealt with it. And it doesn't always work out like that, but I didn't give up.
To know something, he's never disappointed me in all of his competitions over the years. He always manages to bounce back. That's what I think is a sign of a true champion.
I don't think anybody else there, including myself, thought that I was going to come back and put together a winning run.
It wasn't Dave Mirra's greatest comeback, only his latest.
Nobody ever even dreamed that any of this would happen. Who would ever guess that it would come to this?
He makes things look easy. But I think more importantly, he sees more possibilities maybe than other people do.
He still loves to ride his bike, even if the money wasn't there, or the money or any of the exposure or anything, he'd still be riding his bike.
The opportunities that I've gotten, you think that it's gonna level off. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and better. This is what really makes me happy.